Life does not always warn you before it changes you. And if anyone understood this truth, it was a young woman who moved through the world with quiet strength, carrying her dreams like something delicate she feared a world might break. She lived in a small rented room that barely held a bed and a table. But she kept it spotless because it was hers, and that alone made it precious. Every morning she woke before sunrise to prepare for her shift at the cafe, tying her hair into a simple bun and whispering a small prayer under her breath, asking for strength, for peace, for a chance, just a small one, to build a life she wouldn't have to apologize for. The cafe itself wasn't much to look at. The walls were chipped at the edges. The tables wobbled if anyone leaned too heavily on them. And the air always carried the smell of old coffee grounds mixed with faint sadness. People came and went, leaving behind their frustrations, their hurried conversations, their silence, but they rarely saw Anne. She was the girl behind the counter, the one who smiled even when her feet hurt, the one who remembered people's orders even when they didn't remember her name. And she accepted it, because life had taught her early that invisibility was sometimes easier than disappointment. But fate has a strange way of rearranging lives in the moment you least expect. And for Anne, that moment came on a rainy evening when thunder growled across the sky like an old warning, and the clouds burst open without mercy. She was wiping the counter when the cafe door slammed open and a man rushed in, drenched, frustrated, shaking water off his suit like it had personally offended him. His name was Jim, though she didn't know it yet. He had the polished look of someone who lived a life far above hers. Smooth watch, expensive shoes now soaked by the rain, and a face that seemed carved from quiet confidence. He stood there dripping on the floor, looking at her with asked-the-manager energy until he noticed the kindness in her eyes, the kind that disarms even the most stressed-out stranger. He apologized for the mess and explained that his car had broken down just outside. And didn't hesitate. She grabbed an old cafe umbrella, motioned for him to follow, and stepped into storm beside him. Together, they pushed his car a few feet, tried the ignition, and when it didn't work, she stayed with him until a mechanic arrived. She didn't care that rain soaked through her thin shirt or that her shoes collected water. Kindness was who she was. Jim watched her and wondered why a stranger cared so much. The next morning, he returned, not for coffee, but for her. He waited until her shift was slow, then approached with a smile that carried both gratitude and intention. He told her he owned a company, a growing tech startup needing reliable people. He said he had seen more loyalty in her during the storm than he'd seen in some of his staff in years. Then he asked if she would work for him, as his assistant, as someone he could trust. The offer stunned her. She had never imagined someone would look at her and see more than a cafe worker. Her hands trembled slightly as she asked why he chose her, and he simply said, "People like you are rare. I don't want to miss the chance." She accepted. It felt like stepping into light after years of living in shadows. Life changed quietly after that, and learned quickly, faster than anyone expected. She arrived early, stayed late, organized Jim's schedules, saw problems before they became crises, and offered ideas he hadn't even considered. She became his anchor in the chaos of entrepreneurship, and slowly, he began opening up to her. He told her about his past business failures, about people he trusted who betrayed him, about the friend George, who once ran the company with him but left after a bitter fallout that nearly destroyed everything. And listened with empathy, and without meaning to, she warmed his guarded soul. Their connection deepened in ways neither had planned. One evening, after working late, they shared a quiet moment overlooking the city skyline from the office balcony. Jim turned to her with a softness he rarely showed and said, "You steady me." She didn't know what to say, but the look they shared said more than words. From that night forward, something unspoken grew between them. Something tender, delicate, real. But the closer two hearts become, the easier one whisper can tear them apart, and George knew exactly where to aim. He returned suddenly, pretending reconciliation, but behind smiles that envy sharpened like a blade. He noticed how close Jim and it had become, how she had earned trust he once took for granted, and quietly, he began planting seeds of poison. "She's too close," he told Jim. "Assistants like her know how to use emotion to climb. You don't know her background, her intentions. People from her level don't get close without wanting something." Jim tried to ignore him at first, but the doubts were planted, and doubts, once planted, grow in the dark where love cannot reach. Jim began pulling away. It started slowly, missed calls, shorter conversations, unexplained silence. Then came tension. He questioned her decisions, criticized small mistakes, withdrew the warmth he once freely offered, and felt it painfully. But she stayed gentle, believing that love could steady him again. She didn't realize fear was winning, not love. The day everything broke remains carved in her memory like a scar. They attended a company dinner, a small gathering to celebrate a new milestone. She thought it would be a happy night. Instead, in front of colleagues, Jim stood up, looked at her with eyes that once adored her, and said, "I don't think I can trust you anymore." She froze, confused, heart pounding. He continued, voice distant, shaped by insecurity George had fed him. "Your intentions, your closeness, I don't know what's real." She felt people staring. Shame crawled under her skin. She excused herself, dignity barely holding her together, and left before tears could fall. She didn't beg or explain. What is the point of explaining to someone who has chosen to stop listening? She went home, sat on her bed, and stared at the wall wondering how kindness could be repaid with suspicion. She cried quietly that night, the kind of silent tears that come from a soul that has been bruised too deeply to shout. But life doesn't end in heartbreak, though it sometimes feels that way. In the weeks that followed, Anne forced herself to rise. She told herself that if love could vanish so easily, then maybe it wasn't the foundation she needed. With no job, no relationship, and no sense of direction, she turned to the one thing she could still control, her own strength. She took the tiny skills she had learned, borrowed an old laptop, and started a design business from her room. Work was slow at first. Some days she earned nothing. Some days she wanted to quit. But each night she remembered the humiliation she had faced and whispered, "I will not let that be the end of my story." Slowly, clients came. One referred another. Then another. Her work spoke for itself. Simple, elegant, thoughtful, just like her. She poured her heartbreak into creativity. And life quietly began to shift again. Then came the call that changed everything. A lawyer contacted her asking if she was related to her late aunt, her mother's older sister whom she barely knew. Confused, she confirmed. The lawyer asked her to come in. She expected a small inheritance, something modest. She arrived at the office with calm humility, then almost fainted when the lawyer explained the truth. Her aunt, who had moved abroad decades ago, had built an enormous estate, and she left it all to multiple properties, investments, shares in a global tech company, and a trust fund large enough to transform generations. The cafe girl who once lived on tips was now, overnight, a billionaire heiress. She didn't speak for several minutes. Even the lawyer asked if she was okay. How do you process such a gift? How do you carry wealth when life had taught you to expect little? She went home in shock, sat on her bed, the same bed where she had cried weeks earlier, and laughed through tears. Life was unpredictable, unfair, and magical all at once. And yet, she didn't change who she was. She didn't flaunt her new wealth. She didn't run back to show off. She continued growing her business, now with better resources. She invested wisely, expanded quietly, and began funding the education of children in her neighborhood. She became the kind of woman who lifted others because she knew what it meant to fall alone. Her reputation grew, not because she bragged, but because kindness has a way of announcing itself without words. News travels fast, especially the kind that tastes like regret. Jim heard it first from a colleague. He didn't believe it until more people confirmed. He couldn't breathe for a moment. The woman he doubted, the woman he pushed away publicly, the woman he let go, had become more successful than he had ever imagined. He replayed the night he heard her over and over, each time wishing he had chosen trust instead of suspicion. Guilt crushed him, and somewhere beneath the guilt was a deeper truth. He still loved her. Maybe he never stopped. One evening, he gathered courage and dialed her number. His hand shook. When she answered, her voice was calm, calmer than he deserved. He asked if they could meet. He said he had things to say. She agreed, Not out of longing, but out of closure. They met at the same cafe where it all began. She arrived dressed simply but elegantly, carrying herself with confidence that came not from wealth but from healing. Jim stood when he saw her, pain in his eyes. He apologized, truly, deeply, the kind of apology that scrapes the soul clean. He told her he was wrong, that he let fear guide him, that he listened to people who didn't matter, that he missed her every day. He begged for another chance, voice breaking, pride gone. And listen, she didn't rush. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she looked at him with compassion but not attachment. And in the softest voice, she said, "Jim, I forgave you long before you asked. But forgiveness is not the same as return. I'm not the woman you left, and you're not the man I loved." She smiled gently, rose to her feet, and walked away, not out of bitterness, but with a peace that comes from choosing yourself. He watched her leave, understanding suddenly that regret can be heavier than heartbreak. Outside, the evening sun wrapped her in gold as she stepped into her car, sleek, quiet, powerful. She took one last look at the cafe, not from pain, but gratitude, because everything that broke her had also built her. She whispered a prayer for him, not for reconciliation, but for healing. Then she drove off, the city lights dancing on her window, like a promise of a future she finally believed she deserved. And as the road stretched ahead and realized something she would carry forever, that sometimes a blessing is not what life gives you, but what it removes. Because losing Jim showed her her own strength, and heartbreak, painful as it was, became the doorway to a destiny she never imagined. Her story was only beginning, and this time she was walking into it whole, healed, and utterly unafraid.